And it's really a great pleasure and honor to be with you here at Spacefest 7. I'm the last of over 24 speakers, and I'm honored to be the keynote hitter for the speakers track this afternoon. I'd like to start off by claiming to be a very minor footnote to history. 47 years ago, a friend and I were the only college journalists to receive initial official NASA accreditation to cover the Apollo 11 launch, the first moon landing by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. This was by far one of the most exciting experiences of my life. So I want to tell you my story, the improbable story of how at age 19, I was to become an eyewitness to history. I was a child of the 1950s. I was born on 7/11/1950, which is said to be lucky if you believe in such things, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago. It was a different era then. My mother stayed home and home-cooked 3 meals a day. My father wore a bow tie and went off to his office. We watched TV on black and white televisions, and there were just 4 channels that we could watch. There were no fast food restaurants. There were no personal or desktop computers. There was no internet, and there were no mobile phones, and the phones that we did have were tethered to the wall by a cable. Space travel then was just a dream. Indeed, many thought it impossible for men to survive the vacuum and microgravity of space. However, science fiction writers as early as the 19th century promoted the possibility of man in space. Writers such as Jules Verne, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein, my favorite, ignited the imaginations of young people. Magazines such as Collier's presented realistic near-term projections of space travel. Werner von Braun, a former German rocket engineer, was a consultant for the Collier series and also advised television pioneer Walt Disney. Speaking of television, my favorite TV shows growing up were Leave It to Beaver, the Davy Crockett Show, and the Walt Disney Show. The Walt Disney Show premiered in October 1954, and the futuristic show had a series on space travel depicting men being launched into space, rendezvousing with a round-spinning space station, as well as traveling to the moon and Mars. These science fiction novels, magazines, and TV series excited youngsters in the 1950s with the promise of space travel soon, as the Collier headline reads. And I definitely caught the bug. My 8th birthday present, which I still have, is this book, Spice Pilots by Willie Ley. It presented a realistic scenario of training astronauts for space flight. My boyish dream was to fly in space like these fictional space pilots. In the late 1960s, in the late 1950s and 60s, science fiction became reality. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first unmanned satellite, into orbit. At the time, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a Cold War to determine the superiority of their economic political systems. The beep, beep, beep radio call from Sputnik ignited a firestorm of reaction in the United States to catch up in the space race. A new civilian agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was established in October 1958 to lead civilian U.S. efforts in space to launch an unmanned satellite first, and then later a man into space. While the U.S. rushed to catch up with the Soviets were moving ahead also. I very clearly remember on October 12th, 1961, when I was 10 years old, I went back to the house after school, and my dad said, "Did you hear about it?" And I said, "Hear about what? I don't know what's going on." And he held up a newspaper that had the headline, "Man Enters Space." A Soviet major, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, had flown one orbit around the Earth for 108 minutes before safely landing by parachuting from his Vostok capsule. Day one of the space age had arrived. I was deeply disappointed that this was a Russian and not an American, but I was thrilled to understand that man could survive in space at this time. 3 weeks later, on May 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space, flying a parabolic arc suborbitally 116 miles high and landing 15 minutes later. With that flight, I started collecting newspaper headlines and clippings about space events. Later that month, on May 25th, just a few weeks after Shepard's flight, President Kennedy made the bold decision to commit the United States to land a man on the moon and safely return them to Earth by the end of the decade, less than 19 years hence. Little did I think that at age 10 that I would be a college journalist covering that event. At the time, I thought it highly unlikely that a successful moon flight could be accomplished starting from scratch in such a relatively short period of time. And how would yet just another starry-eyed kid like myself ever be able to participate? The next year, Colonel John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth on February 20th, 1962. Senator Glenn and his wife of 73 years, Annie, have been heroes of mine ever since. Later, he was the first of many astronauts who I would write to in the ensuing years. Following the space program became one of my main interests. I closely listened to television and radio coverage, some of which I recorded on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, which I got for my 13th birthday. I've saved newspapers and magazines about space. I wrote to NASA and the astronauts. I became what was variously called a space nut, a space nerd, or more politely, a space enthusiast. Today, we are more probably known as space hipsters. My first opportunity to meet real astronauts came with the Gemini 4 mission in June 1965. This was a 2-man flight where Ed White made America's first spacewalk. The Gemini 4 commander, Jim McDivitt, was from Chicago, and Mayor Richard J. Daley ordered a big Tinker Tape Parade and celebration in honor of the flight. A Q&A with high school students was held, and I was able to get a ticket from my high school. Jim and Ed received a thunderous welcome, and it was exciting for me to be with astronauts in person for the first time. These are blow-ups from a very primitive Instamatic camera, but this is Ed White at the podium here, and Jim McDivitt answering questions from nearby me from some students. They expertly handled a few softball questions. I would have wanted to ask them, did they think it realistic to meet John Kennedy's goal? And I'm very pleased that General McDivitt is here with us 51 years later after these events. 2 months after Gemini 4, when I was 15, my family moved to the Chicago suburbs. I entered a new high school where I participated in a lot of extracurricular activities. However, most importantly, I became deeply involved in our high school newspaper as a reporter and editor. My next opportunity to meet one of my heroes came a year later after the Gemini 9 mission flown by Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan. The flight was marked by a rendezvous with an angry alligator target adapter and by Gene Cernan's spacewalk from hell. Cernan is from Bellwood, a small suburb just west of Chicago, and a parade and reception were held in his honor, which I attended. I had a chance to say hi to the crew just before the parade, and Tom Stafford autographed a route map for me. Members of the Cernan family, including his mother, Mrs. Rose Cernan, were at the reception. I'm shown circled here in this Sun-Times article from June 27, 1965, from when I met the astronauts. And again, it's the 50th anniversary this week of the Gemini 9 mission, and it's great to have Gene Cernan here.